The Oraculous prison loomed like a fortress in the void, its massive structure casting a shadow even in the starlit darkness of space. Ringed by a lethal asteroid field and patrolled by Sentinel drones, it was a place few dared approach and from which no one escaped. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The newest inmate, Elias Riker, was escorted through the high-security corridors by two robotic guards, their sensors scanning constantly for any sign of disobedience. The other prisoners watched from their cells, curiosity etched on faces both human and alien. Elias was shoved into a small interrogation room, the door sealing with a hiss behind him. Across from him sat Warden Nalthus, a being whose appearance was as stern as his reputation. His skin was a deep shade of blue, common to the inhabitants of Thulnaris, and his eyes, sharp and assessing, never left Elias. "Elias Riker," Nalthus began, his voice echoing slightly off the metal walls. "Your record is impressive in a way that I wish it wasn't. Smuggling, forgery, and now, accused of conspiring against the Galactic Council. What do you have to say for yourself?" Elias met Nalthus's gaze squarely. "I've been framed, Warden. I came here because I had no choice, not because I'm guilty. Framed or not, your chances of leaving are non-existent. Oraculous is escape-proof," Nalthus stated flatly, leaning back in his chair. "That's what I've heard," Elias replied, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "But everyone loves a good challenge." Nalthus frowned, not amused. "I'd advise against any foolish attempts, Mr. Riker. The consequences here are severe." Elias was then led to his cell, deep within the complex. The cell was a small cube, stark and uninviting, with a narrow cot and a view of the starry abyss. As the door clanged shut, the sound of his heartbeat loud in the silence, Elias sank onto the cot, his mind racing. The prisoner in the next cell, a scaly-skinned Vixusian named Zorak, peered through a small gap. "You're the human, aren't you? The one they've been talking about all week?" Elias glanced over, nodding. "That's me, Elias Riker. And you are?" "Zorak. Been here longer than I care to remember," the alien replied, his voice a low hiss. "Heard you're planning an escape. Count me in." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you a bit quick to trust a fellow inmate?" "In Oraculous, we either trust each other or we rot alone," Zorak said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. "Besides, I have skills that might help. I was an engineer before all this." Elias considered this, then nodded slowly. "All right, Zorak. Let's see what we can do together." Their conversation was cut short by the sound of the guards returning. Elias lay back on his cot, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The odds were against him, but that had never stopped him before. If there was a way out of Oraculous, he would find it. And with Zorak's help, maybe, just maybe, he could turn the impossible into the possible. Elias sat on the edge of his cot, a data slate glowing softly in his hands, pretending to read as he listened to the guard's heavy footsteps recede down the corridor. He glanced toward Zorak's cell, catching the Vixusian's reflective eyes in the dim light. "Zorak," Elias whispered, his voice barely carrying through the thick, sound-dampening walls designed to isolate prisoners. "You mentioned you were an engineer. What exactly can you do?" From the shadows of his cell, Zorak's voice came, low and conspiratorial. "Before I was caught, I worked on high-security systems. Locks, surveillance, you name it. I've cracked it or built it." Elias's interest piqued. "That could come in handy. We'll need a solid plan and someone on the inside. Any allies you can think of here?" Zorak was silent for a moment, considering. "There's one. A Galdan named Lena. She's got away with stealth, could navigate this place blindfolded, but she doesn't trust easily. We need to get her on our side then," Elias said decisively. He stood up and paced the small space of his cell, thinking through their next moves. "Tomorrow, during the yard time, we'll talk to her." The next day, under the dull gray sky of the prison yard, Elias and Zorak approached Lena. She was sitting alone, her lithe, shadowy figure almost blending into the dark corners of the yard. Her eyes, a deep, vibrant yellow, watched them approach with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Lena," Zorak greeted her, nodding slightly. "This is Elias. We have a proposition for you." Lena studied Elias, her gaze sharp. "I've heard the guards talking. The human wants out. What makes you think I'd want in?" Elias met her gaze steadily. "Because you're here under false charges like me. We can help each other." "And if we get caught?" Lena asked, her tone cautious but interested. We plan carefully, so we don't get caught, Elias responded, a determined edge to his voice. I believe with your skills, Zorak's knowledge, and what I can bring to the table, we can pull this off. Lena considered this, her eyes flicking between Zorak and Elias. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, I'm in. But we do this my way. Stealth and precision. Agreed, Elias said, a small smile breaking through. Now let's start by figuring out the shift changes and patrol routes. Zorak, you said you have access to certain parts of the security system. Zorak nodded, pulling out a small, concealed data device from his pocket. I've managed to keep this hidden. I can access some of the security feeds and create minor diversions. But for anything big, I'll need to be at a control panel. Then we'll get you there, Elias stated, clapping Zorak on the shoulder. It's time we turned the tables on the guards. Over the next few days, they hatched their plan in hushed tones, each member of the trio bringing their own expertise. Elias, with his tactical knowledge and charisma, rallied a few more sympathetic inmates to their cause. Lena mapped out the guard rotations and blind spots in the security, while Zorak worked on hacking the digital locks they'd need to bypass. Their camaraderie grew, a bond formed under the pressure of their pending escape. Each step of the plan was meticulously crafted with backup contingencies for every possible mishap. As their preparation neared completion, the reality of what they were about to attempt settled over them. They weren't just breaking out of a cell, they were challenging the galaxy's most formidable prison. The atmosphere in Oraculus was charged with tension as the day of the annual Galactic Oversight Assembly inspection approached. This was the moment Elias, Zorak, and Lena had been waiting for. The inspection would bring slight chaos and a thinning of their usual strict routines, providing the perfect backdrop for their escape. Early in the morning, as the first inspectors arrived, clad in their pristine uniforms, Elias nudged Zorak. Ready? Zorak nodded, clutching a small device. This will trigger the alarms in the East Wing. Should draw most of the guards there. And I've set up a few surprises in the surveillance system, Lena added, her voice low. They'll be blind for exactly 7 minutes, not a second more. Let's make it count, Elias said, clapping his hands together softly. He turned to a group of inmates who were in on the plan. Remember, chaos but no violence. We don't want to hurt anyone, we just need a distraction. As the inspectors moved through the facility, Lena subtly triggered the first of her surprises. A sudden blast of static noise erupted over the communication systems, sending confused guards scrambling to identify the source. At the same time, Zorak activated his device, and alarms blared from the East Wing, accompanied by flashing red lights. Phase 2, Elias whispered, and they moved toward the central control room amidst the confusion. Guards rushed past them, drawn toward the source of the alarms, their faces etched with frustration and concern. Elias, Zorak, and Lena slipped into the control room just as the door was closing, blocked from snapping shut by a carefully placed tool. Inside, the control room was momentarily unmanned, as the sole operator had run out to assist with the chaos. Zorak quickly moved to a terminal, his fingers flying over the keys. I've got access, he hissed. Lena, now! Lena guarded the door, watching the hallway for any signs of returning guards. She counted under her breath, each second pulsing like a heartbeat in the silent room. Elias stood by Zorak, watching as the Vixusian bypassed layer after layer of security protocols. Almost there. And got it. We have control over the doors to the docking bay. Let's move, Elias urged, leading the way out of the control room. They darted through the corridors, now using the confusion they had sown to cover their tracks. Inmates, mixed with a few guards, were everywhere, shouting and trying to make sense of the situation. As they reached the docking bay, a loud voice echoed through the prison's PA system, announcing a lockdown. Ignore it! Keep going! Elias shouted over the din. They reached the docking bay, where a small transport ship was docked. This is it, Lena said, her voice tense. We're almost out. But as they approached the ship, Commander Talos appeared, his figure imposing even in the midst of chaos. Going somewhere? He barked, a hint of betrayal in his eyes. Elias stepped forward, his posture calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Yes, and you're not going to stop us. A tense standoff ensued, with Talos assessing the situation. His gaze landed on Elias, then on the ship. With a heavy sigh, he stepped aside. Make it count, he muttered, his voice barely audible. With Talos's unexpected acquiescence, they boarded the ship, the doors closing with a hiss behind them. As the ship detached from the dock, Elias looked out the window at the receding image of Oraculus, their prison now a part of their past. They had done it. They had escaped the galaxy's highest security prison. As the transport ship surged forward, leaving Oraculus and its chaotic sirens behind, Elias turned to his companions with a determined look. We're not out of the woods yet. Next, we need to get through the asteroid field surrounding this sector. It's dense and dangerous. Lena, her eyes fixed on the navigation console, nodded. I've studied the patterns. It's going to be a rough ride, but I can guide us through. Zorak adjusted the ship's shields, prepping for the turbulent path ahead. Shields are at maximum. It'll drain our power faster, but it'll give us the cover we need. Elias took the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls as Lena fed him the coordinates. Here goes nothing, he muttered, steering the ship towards the densest part of the asteroid field. The asteroids loomed large in the viewport, tumbling rocks of varying sizes that threatened to crush the ship with their sheer mass. Elias maneuvered with precision, guided by Lena's directions, each move as calculated as a chess play. Zorak monitored the ship's systems, calling out energy levels and shield status. Energy at 70%. 65. We need to find a less intense route or we'll burn out before we clear this. Lena scanned the asteroid patterns, searching for a viable path. There. A thinner section to the right, only a small window of opportunity. Elias, you need to take it now. With a sharp turn, Elias directed the ship towards the indicated path, the vessel shuddering as smaller rocks glanced off the shields. They were in a narrow corridor of space, barely wide enough to pass through. The shields won't hold much longer at this rate, Zorak warned, his voice tense. Just then, an alarm blared. Another ship was approaching fast from behind. We've got company, Lena said, her voice grim. Looks like a security drone. Must have followed us from Oraculus. Elias glanced at the rear camera display, seeing the drone closing in, its weapons charging. Zorak, can you handle it? On it, Zorak replied, moving to the ship's defense controls. He targeted the drone and fired, the ship rocking as the recoil from the defense cannons echoed through the hull. The drone was hit, spiraling off into an asteroid and exploding on impact. With the immediate threat neutralized, Elias focused on navigating the ship through the last stretches of the asteroid field. Finally, they emerged into open space, the field behind them like a tumultuous sea they had somehow crossed. We're clear of the field, Elias breathed out, the tension easing from his shoulders. Lena collapsed back into her chair, relief washing over her. I can't believe we actually made it. Zorak checked the systems, confirming they were no longer in immediate danger. We did, but we've drained a lot of our resources. We'll need to find a place to lay low and recharge, both the ship and ourselves. Elias nodded, setting their course toward a small, uninhabited planet known only to a few smugglers as a hideout. We'll rest there, figure out our next move. We're free now, thanks to each of you. As the stars stretched out before them, the small crew of the transport ship faced their new reality. Fugitives in a vast galaxy, with only each other to rely on. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, Elias felt a spark of genuine hope about the future. As their stolen ship hummed through the cold vacuum of space, heading towards a secluded planet for much-needed refuge, Elias took a moment to share more of his story with Zorak and Lena. They gathered around a small table in the ship's compact living area, the tension of their escape momentarily put aside. Elias began. Back when I was a commander in the Galactic Fleet, I stumbled upon a corruption scheme at the highest levels of the Council. They were using the fleet to transport illegal artifacts under the guise of diplomatic missions. Lena leaned forward, her expression intense. Is that why they framed you? Yes, Elias confirmed. I was getting too close to exposing them. They set me up with false charges of conspiracy and had me locked away in Oraculus before I could bring the evidence to light. Zorak's eyes narrowed, his scales bristling slightly in anger. So this isn't just about escaping prison. It's about clearing your name. Exactly. And more than just clearing my name, Elias added. It's about exposing the corruption that permeates the Council. It's a rot that threatens the very integrity of our galaxy. Lena sat back, her arms crossed. We've got a tough road ahead then. The Council won't just let us expose them. They'll come after us with everything they've got. That's why we need to be smart, Elias said, glancing between his two companions. We can't just hide and hope they forget about us. We need allies and proof. Zorak nodded, a determined look crossing his features. Then we should start by gathering evidence. you mentioned illegal artifact smuggling. Any idea where we might find records or proof of these transactions? Elias tapped on the data slate, pulling up a star map. There are a few leads I never got the chance to follow up on. There's a black market on Dreos 4. It's risky, but we might find something there that could tie the council to the smuggling operations. Lena's eyes gleamed with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Dreos 4, huh? That place is a cesspool of thieves and black market dealers. If there's dirt to be found on the council, it'll be there. Elias nodded. Then that's our next stop after we recharge. We'll need to be discreet. Dreos 4 isn't exactly friendly to outsiders, especially those poking around in things they shouldn't. The ship continued its silent voyage through space, the stars a constant reminder of the vastness of their challenge. As they neared the secluded planet, the reality of their situation settled in. They were up against formidable opponents, but together they had a chance. Landing on the planet gave the trio a brief respite. They took this time to plan, gather their strength, and prepare for the dangers of Dreos 4. Elias knew that what lay ahead could be more perilous than any asteroid field or prison break. But the truth was worth every risk, and he was no longer alone in his fight. With Zorak and Lena by his side, the path to justice seemed just a little less daunting. As their ship descended through the thick, swirling clouds of Dreos 4, the trio prepared for what was likely to be one of the most dangerous parts of their journey. The planet, known for its lawlessness and thriving black market, was a hive of scum and villainy that drew the galaxy's most dubious characters. Elias, Zorak, and Lena disguised themselves to blend in with the locals. Donning rugged, weather-beaten clothing and altering their appearances with makeshift prosthetics, they disembarked in a crowded, bustling market district. The air was thick with the aroma of exotic spices and the din of haggling vendors. "We need to be careful here," Elias whispered, leading the way through the throng. "Keep your eyes open for anyone who might be selling data or artifacts that could be linked to the council." Lena nodded, her eyes scanning the stalls. "I'll take the south end of the market. Zorak, you head north. Elias, maybe stick to the central area. Meet back here in 1 hour." They split up, each delving deeper into the market's chaotic energy. Elias approached a stall draped with ancient artifacts and various datapads. Feigning casual interest, he struck up a conversation with the vendor, a slimy creature with too many eyes. "Got anything special?" Elias asked, his tone laden with implied meaning. The vendor's eyes flickered with a hint of cunning. "Perhaps, but such items come at a price. What is your interest?" "Old records, council dealings, that sort of thing," Elias replied, keeping his voice low. The vendor hesitated, then pulled out a small, encrypted datapad. "This contains shipping logs from several high-profile deals. Not cheap." Elias glanced at the pad, sensing its potential worth. "I'll take it." After the exchange, Elias tucked the datapad away securely and made his way back to the rendezvous point. Zorak returned shortly after, carrying a few stolen security passes. "I got these off a drunken guard," Zorak explained. "They might give us access to restricted areas if we need it." Lena was last to return, her expression grim. "We need to move," she said hurriedly. "Bounty hunters. Saw one asking about a human, and 2 aliens matching our descriptions." Without wasting another moment, they navigated their way back to the ship, dodging curious glances and the ever-present danger lurking in the crowded streets. As they lifted off from Dreos 4, Elias examined the datapad, hoping it contained the evidence they needed. Back in space, the ship's console lit up with alerts. "We've got company," Lena announced, checking the sensors. "Looks like that bounty hunter wasn't just asking questions. He's on our tail." Elias took the pilot's seat, his mind racing. "Zorak, ready those defense mechanisms you rigged up. Lena, help me plot a course. We can't lead them back to any populated systems." With the ship weaving through asteroid fields and nebulae, the trio managed to evade their pursuer, using every trick at their disposal. The chase left them near a remote system, giving them a momentary breath of safety as they regrouped. "Let's see what we've got on this datapad," Elias said, finally breaking the tension. "It's time we find out exactly what the council has been hiding." As the decrypted files began to display, the pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. Shipping routes, clandestine meetings, and illegal artifact trades, all pointing back to the highest levels of the Galactic Council. "This is it," Elias said, a steely resolve in his voice. "With this information, we can blow the lid off this whole operation, but we have to be smart about how we use it." The trio set their course for the Galactic Assembly, where they planned to expose the corruption. With solid proof in hand and a galaxy watching, they prepared to face their most formidable challenge yet. The journey to the Galactic Assembly was fraught with peril, as Elias, Zorak, and Lena knew they were carrying explosive evidence that could topple the most powerful in the galaxy. Their ship was quiet, the tension almost tangible as they approached the massive structure floating at the edge of the known universe, a beacon of civilization and governance. "We need a plan that gets us through their security and into the main assembly where we can present this evidence," Elias said, examining the layout of the assembly that Zorak had managed to secure. "It's going to be heavily guarded, especially with the assembly in session." Lena pointed to a less guarded service entrance on the schematics. "We could use these maintenance tunnels. They'll take us straight to the lower levels of the assembly hall." Zorak nodded, pulling up a digital toolkit on his device. "I can disable the cameras along that route, but once we're inside, we're going to need a distraction to reach the main floor unnoticed." Elias thought for a moment, then said, "I have a few contacts who owe me favors. I'll call them in. We'll need all the help we can get." As they docked at the Assembly's visitor bay, posing as delegates from a remote sector, their forged credentials got them past the first checkpoint. From there, they slipped into the service corridors, the hum of the Assembly above them a constant reminder of what was at stake. Using Zorak's hacks, they bypassed security systems, moving stealthily towards their target. Lena's expertise proved invaluable as she disarmed physical traps and locks with a deftness that saved them precious time. They reached the auxiliary control room just below the main assembly hall. Here, Elias contacted his allies, coordinating a staged protest at the front of the building as their diversion. As shouts and chants broke out, drawing guards away from their post, the trio made their final push. Emerging from a side door, they found themselves at the back of the massive hall, filled with delegates and diplomats from across the galaxy, all under the watchful eyes of the Assembly's security. With a deep breath, Elias stepped forward, datapad in hand, and made his way to the speaker's platform. His unexpected appearance caused murmurs of confusion and curiosity. "Honorable delegates," Elias began, his voice echoing through the hall, amplified by the shock of his presence. "I come before you not just as a fugitive, but as a whistleblower of corruption at the highest levels of our government." Security moved towards him, but the evidence displayed on the screens around the hall froze them in their tracks. Shipping logs, illicit transactions, and communications linked prominent council members to criminal activities across the galaxy. The assembly erupted into chaos, with some calling for immediate action, while others demanded a thorough investigation. Amid the uproar, Elias stood firm, his allies among the delegates stepping forward to argue for his protection under whistleblower laws. As debates raged, the head of the assembly called for order. "We will have immediate inquiry into these allegations. The accused will be held accountable until proven innocent. Security, stand down. Let the truth be our guide." Elias, Zorak, and Lena were escorted into protective custody, their mission accomplished, but their futures uncertain as the assembly promised transparency and justice in the unfolding scandal. The trio watched from a secure room as the assembly dealt with the fallout, their bond strengthened by the ordeal they had endured together. They knew the galaxy would never be the same after today, and neither would they. As the dust settled following the upheaval at the Galactic Assembly, Elias, Zorak, and Lena found themselves in a position they had scarcely dared to hope for. Not only had they successfully exposed the deep-seated corruption within the Galactic Council, but they had also been vindicated and hailed as heroes by many across the galaxy. In the days that followed, the Assembly initiated sweeping reforms. High-ranking officials implicated in the scandal were arrested, and trials were set to ensure justice was served. Meanwhile, the Assembly established a new oversight committee dedicated to preventing such corruption from taking root again, and they extended an invitation to Elias to join as an advisor. Elias stood looking out over the Capitol from the Assembly building, contemplating the offer. Beside him, Lena and Zorak discussed their own plans. "I think I might take up that offer to train the Assembly's security forces," Zorak said, a slight smile crossing his reptilian features. "They could use some insight from someone who's seen both sides of the law." Lena nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "And I'm considering leading a task force to recover stolen artifacts and return them to their rightful cultures. It's time these treasures went back to where they belong." Elias turned to them, his expression mixed with pride and a hint of sadness. "And what about us? After everything we've been through together?" Lena placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll always be a team, Elias. No matter where we are, that won't change. We've changed the galaxy together. Zorak chuckled. She's right. You got us into this, and we've come out the other side stronger. We'll always be connected. Elias smiled, the weight of their journey settling into a sense of accomplishment. I guess this is where our paths diverge, at least for now. I've decided to take up the Assembly's offer. With the right changes, I believe we can ensure this kind of corruption never happens again. As they prepared to go their separate ways, they agreed to meet regularly, to keep the bonds they had formed intact, and to oversee the progress of the new galaxy they had helped to shape. In the final scenes, Elias addressed the Assembly, his voice resonant and full of conviction. What we've achieved here is only the beginning. We've been given a rare second chance to build something better, something worthy of the trust placed in us by billions across the galaxy. Let us be diligent, let us be just, and above all, let us be kind. The future is watching us. The Assembly erupted into applause, not just for Elias's words, but for the promise of a new era. As the Assembly disbanded, Elias, Zorak, and Lena shared a final look, a silent acknowledgement of their shared trials and triumphs. The chapter closed on Elias returning to his new office, a simple room with a view of the thriving city below. He settled behind his desk, the datapad that had changed the galaxy now resting in a drawer. A reminder of the power of truth and courage. Outside, the stars continued to shine, the galaxy spinning on, a little brighter for their efforts.